Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Thank you for sticking with us on Early Exchange this beautiful Thursday morning. Yes, the weather is cool. Everywhere is calm in Nigeria. How is it from where you're watching us? You could just drop a comment, let us know as we proceed on the show. So, the first conversation will be on the UN Security Council, which is the most powerful and important organ within the United Nations, and it is responsible for maintaining peace and security. So the council has 15 members, inclusive of 5 permanent members. Now, Nigeria, a country in Africa, is seeking to be one of the 5, to add to the 5 permanent members in the United Nations Security Council, as there have been calls for an expansion of members, permanent members of the UN Security Council. Will Nigeria be admitted as a permanent member of the UN's Security Council? We have a policy expert in the studio with us. Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze is here, is looking fresh like $1 billion. I told him that. He told me why he looks that way this morning. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the show.
Good SOUQ, good Nigeria.
I see the good Nigeria is really working because you look good.
Really?
Do you mind sharing the secrets? What's been happening? Your economy seems to be
You just came
very
back from
fast.
Old Trafford. What do you expect?
Oh, really?
But the problem I have with Manchester United is just they've been on a losing streak. So
I went to kill the devil.
So does that mean that having killed the devil, so it's just the Reds and not the Red Devils anymore?
The devil, no more devil.
Oh. Well, let's not get into the sports arena right now because, Tici will just be so happy that he can speak about
Yeah,
that.
let's change the conversation of
swipe left.
Let's swipe right now and look at national or international security issues. So the United Nations Security Council having 5 permanent members, and over the years there have been calls from different quarters. Africa has indicated interest in having a permanent seat, and Nigeria is one of the countries pushing for a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. Before we look at the chances of Nigeria getting admitted, the UN Security Council, too, has been criticized in recent times for not being effective as it should be. What's your thought on the current state of the United Nations?
Well, I think every student of international relations agree to the fact that there is so much that the United Nations can do because it's not a supranational authority. For you to be really effective, you have to have state structure. The executive, the judiciary, and the legislative arm. Why, of course, you have some of these arms in the United Nations that they look as if they are really supranational, but they don't really have the power to enforce some of the rules that are made. And so to that extent, you find that you cannot really say, oh, are they as effective as they should be? So it's just like a mediation agency. And I think that's the way people should assess the United Nations. But talking about effectiveness, you also understand that because of the structure of the United Nations, with the 5 permanent members in the Security Council, usually refer to the 10 other members as observers, who are elected every year to observe what is happening at the United Nations. But the real power block there is the 5 permanent members, China represented by Taiwan, which of course has been an anomaly for a very long time because the mainland China don't really want to be represented at that council by Taiwan. But that's what the US prefer. Now you also have Russia there, a former USSR, represented the east of Europe. France represented the west of Europe, and then the United Kingdom, and the American who had the real power after the end of the Second World War. So these are the basic people who come together to say, how do we regulate global peace and security? Now, don't forget, like they say, to whom much is given, much is also expected. And by this choice also, you also have seen that a lot of things were put into account. The 4 power pillars: your military strength, your economic strength, your ideological strength, and more importantly, you're also looking at your ability to be responsible even in the use of power. And this has been the way the UN is structured. So any of the members, or 5 members, can actually veto a particular decision to do an operation or not to do. And that has been the real bane of the Security Council. You can meet and agree and say, okay, this is what we want to do. And a single vote of one member can change that narrative. And of course, like it's recorded in history, Russia has been the notorious one in the use of this veto.
The old man.
Yeah, of course, they've counted over 158 times that Russia had used that veto. America about 90 times in the use of that veto to stop some certain action from happening. But because it's an agreement that, of course, once a nation vetoed, that particular resolution cannot go forward, then, of course, you find that the inability of the UN to really enforce itself become a problem, because you're having an ideological war here between the West and the East. And so if it does not fall in line with the ideology of any of the powers, of course, they are not going to push for it. And if anything or resolution you are taking is affecting an ally of any of the power, they are going to veto it. So this is why you find that the United Nations, to a very large extent, has not functioned as everybody expected it to function. But I think that has been the call that a lot of people feel that there should be the need to democratize the United Nations Security Council. Some have advocated that every continent should be represented. But when you look at the power configuration, you see that the continents that are not represented at the moment are the weaklings, really. The South American continent, you have the Australia continent, and then you have the African continent. So the major continents are represented in that power block. And I think if we want to be represented, then of course we must be ready to pay the piper somehow.
Well, France and United Kingdom have not made use of their veto. I mean, I think that's worthy of a note. And one would argue that it's important that politicking or lobbying of African countries would have come to bear at this point in search for a place at the table of the United Nations. In furtherance to that statement, I'd want to think that, or I'd want to ask, do you think we have what it takes? You've talked about Africa continent, being weakly in South America, and of course the other countries are the power blocks and the security forces and strength. Some persons have argued that with what's happening with insecurity in Nigeria, we are not ready to have a place at that table. Do you think more consideration should be given to some other African country who are more stable when it comes to security?
Yeah, but you find that over the years, the argument has always been that who are you going to give power to? You have to give power to states that are fairly stable.
Before you go further, do you give power or you take power?
You see, here at the United Nations, your ability to take power will be almost 0 to 1,000 ratio. Because here, this is what happened. You put them into context. First World War happened, and then, of course, the United States intervened and stopped the menace. Then German aggression started. The United States intervened and stopped the menace because it had the power to do so. Now, when you say you want to take power, you have to look at who are you taking power from. You don't have the economic power. You don't have the military power. You don't have the economic power. You don't have the power of even the intellect, so to speak. So you find that really the argument has always been that power should be given to people who can responsibly use it. And I don't think that the West really believe that African nations are responsible enough to be able to deploy the use of that power. And I think that is really the reason why they have not really asked that that body be enlarged. But we are even looking at it now from the point of view of democratization. What difference will it make if Africa is there? What difference will it make if South America is represented?
I was thinking, what benefits?
Yeah, but really, what's the real benefit? These guys are the one really bearing the brunt of the entire peace in the world. And there's a whole lot that is involved in terms of the use of resources, the use of their military, the use of their technology to drive the process of world peace. Now, when you say you are coming to the table, what will Africa, for example, be bringing to the table? And when you are going to represent Africa, is it going to be rotational? So I think the best that the UN had done was to actually allow, after a while, for the election of some members to come to serve in that council. And I think Nigeria has served in the Security Council, but at least just for 1 year. So like I said, it's like in an observer status. And to see how those who are developed in the use of power can responsibly deploy power. You see, we, to a very large extent, whether it's the Anglophone or the Lusophone or the Francophone, we are tied to the apron string of the West. We got our validation from United Kingdom. And some other West African states get their validation from France. And don't even forget that after the exit of France, for example, in some of African countries, that until now as we speak, the economy power of most Francophone Africa is still held in Paris. So if they are speaking for you in your own country, now you can also feel that they can speak for you and you are represented. So I feel for the way to look at it is that the Commonwealth is represented by the United Kingdom.
Okay.
The Americans are represented by American. And then, of course, the other ideological bloc is represented by Russia. But I think going really beyond that is that, can we really have a strong United Nations? What's the benefit of even being a member of security, apart from the ego that one may enjoy, that, oh, you have the status of saying that I'm sitting at United Nations and you are really not making contributions, because the people who are going to make the contributions are those who are supplying both the intelligence and the military power and the economic power to drive things and make it happen.
But you mentioned that any member or any permanent member of the Security Council has veto power.
Yeah.
Isn't that a benefit? And if this veto power has been used by Russia 158 times, 92 times by the United Nations, and 32 times by China, and 16 times by the other countries, so is that not a benefit for Nigeria when it comes to policies, when it comes to issues that will affect Africa? Would that not be worth it?
Yeah, but you have to look at what the issues are, where these veterans are used. And I really feel, was Africa really losing or gaining? But I think for me, really, what Africa need to do, first and foremost, is to actually pull its act together and first detach itself from the apron string of the SOUQ colonial masters.
Is this not part of the channel or the route to detaching itself, being part of the decision makers?
I don't think what you need to do is to first build your power base based on those 4 different pillars that I just mentioned. Look at your military size. We are still begging America to give us Tucano to fight our war here, able to quell our insurgency here. So if we cannot even manage these internal issues, what energy do we have to even have to now be investing resources that we don't even have to develop our infrastructure in basic way? I think Africa must, while we talk about the United Nations as a big body, I see it only in name, in terms of reputation or ego. I don't see any particular benefit that confers to us as a nation. What will confer honor on us as a nation is first build our economy and then build our power base. And then once we are able to be strong enough to carry our problem, then we cannot be thinking of carrying other people's burden.
Doctor, over the years, we've seen Nigeria's security agencies, the army, the police, take part in peacekeeping missions.
Oh, yeah.
ECOMOG, UN peacekeeping, and they contribute significantly to the success of those missions, deploying men and equipment to areas where there are needs. Now, during the World War II, a lot of Nigerians were sent to India to go and fight. That's contribution. And so if, when there are needs and crises, Nigerians are called upon, don't they now deserve, even if it's not maybe a temporary standing of some sort, just like you have the other members to represent Africa? How many African countries contribute as much as Nigeria in some of these peacekeeping missions? Yes, you can't take away the fact that we do have internal security issues. And I mean, dare say that's the same thing in most countries. You have all of those issues, I mean, inherent in some of these countries, even in the world power. But then the fact that Africa is underrepresented, if for any reason Nigeria, as Big Brother Africa, in quote, decides to step up to the plate, I mean, it should count for something, don't you think?
Yeah, but that's a real question that one needs to really put on the table. What I'm saying is that Africa, I don't want even to zero on Nigeria, should first of all build itself up in terms of having a strong voice. And I think our founding fathers, like people like Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere, had this understanding that Africa needed to really be one, first and foremost, to be able to play at that arena. Because there's no one single member state in Africa that have the real capacity to drive these things. Except for we want to make politics out of it. But the truth is that this requires a lot. But talking about the participation of Africa or Nigeria in peacekeeping operation, we saw the operation in ECOMOG, whether in Liberia or Syria alone, to restore peace to that. But we were not strategic. We have never, as a nation, been very strategic in terms of our interactions with global power. Let me tell you what happened with power. When power, for you to be able to hold power, you concede a lot. The struggle by a certain president in Nigeria to become the Secretary General of the United Nations at a certain part of our history gave away willingly part of Nigeria, which was ruled in favor of ICJ because we were not represented. Because for them, that was like being responsible to say, oh, you love global peace. But there was no referendum when this part of Nigeria was ceded to another country in Africa. So what I'm saying is that what role have we been able to play, even in our African continent, to stop, even align a rally around us? Because you can't call yourself a giant. You're only a giant when everybody has respect for you. What respect do we even earn in first place in Africa? Do we even have it? How many times will even our neighboring country vote against us, even in international stage and affairs? Even with all the donations and the free money that we're throwing away without being strategic. And I think that we should concentrate, really, for me, on things that are important. And what are these things that are important? We need to build our economy. We need to build our infrastructure. Our people need to grow up. So rather than throw money around or throw strength around where you are not needed, build your base. And then once you are strong enough, people can identify you. And then they will drag you in. Because at the founding of the United Nations in 1946, really, China was not part of the conversation. But Americans saw the importance and the significance of China. And then they said, China must be represented, but not the mainland China because of the ideological bent, but they want Taiwan, which was more liberal, to represent China. And they dragged in those guys. And the United Kingdom said, oh, well, if you look at the whole of Europe, you find that France is also very strategic and like a bulwark for Europe. So let France come in here. So that decision was actually taken by a few people who was looking at how to remedy the catastrophic destruction that happened after the Second World War. And you can see what was put in. And that's what I'm saying. To whom much is given, much is also expected. So it's not just being a tutelar head in the table. You must be able to bring substance to the table. Now, the question is, do we have that substance?
Now, if we were to look at that critically, if Africa has the substance, so South Africa is part of BRICS, that must have been a strategic decision to include South Africa as part of BRICS. And South Africa is also part of the United Nations. Going by your explanation of how some of the members were included, or some of the countries were included as permanent members in the UN, China and France, is there no strategic or is there no benefit for the UN if they include an African country? Is there no a rationale behind it? Can we not see a strategy there, looking at the cause globally for an addition to the Security Council? Would Africa be that strategic decision in the inclusion of a new member at the Security Council?
Yeah, but also to look at the functionality of the Security Council, really. Basic resolutions are done at the General Assembly, where everybody is present and votes are done, really. Now, the Security Council is issues on where intervention should happen and where intervention should not happen. And that's the point that I'm making, really. Because when you look at it, even in terms of our fight, our participation in the Second World War, how did we participate? We participated as Commonwealth under the leadership of the United Kingdom. That's how we participated. So that's the point I'm making here, really. For me, people feel, what's the real usefulness of the United Nations? I don't see anything we can really attach to it, except that it become a supranational body, which of course a lot of people really have been advocating for. That will have like a one world government with what some advocates are called the Federation Act. I don't know if you have seen that. There's a constitution now that's been written for a federation of the earth, where you have one general assembly where all governments are represented, and then of course you have one legislative body, and then of course you now have an international policeman. And once that body is established, then of course we become the president of the Federation of the Earth. Of course, we become also rotation, and that, of course, a lot of power plays will come into that organization. But whether that happen or not happen, but the United Nations, as it is today, really, is like a toothless bulldog in my ranking. And I don't think it's something that worth the energy or the waste of resource, which many African nations have done. It's not the first time. The push has always been there. But in each of these push, the resources that we have not found to develop ourselves at home, we tend to fritter away and to show to people that we have the right. But I think Africa need to grow. Nigeria need to grow, for example, and see how do we fix our problems, first and foremost, before fixing other people's problems. Our people can't go to farm. How will membership in the Security Council enable people to go to farm? So I think we should prioritize things that are important. And for me, what is really important right now is first our survival. So once we survive, then we can now begin to think about, well, now you have some more money in your pocket, then you have to go and help somebody. Even on the aeroplane, when the air hostess are talking to you, they say to you, in case there's an emergency, you have to save yourself first before even saving your child. And I think that's a wise thing for us as a continent. That what is important is that we have to build our home base and see how responsibly we are able to use power. How we are able to even democratize ourselves.
Doctor, just to take the statement away from you, it feels like, yes, you feel there's need for priority for Nigeria to shift its priority, instead of trying to seek regional power or world power, try to put your house together first before launching forward. I mean, it's in tandem with the a proverb in my dialect, and I really understand that. I mean, you
are the only one who understands.
Yeah, I'll translate it for you.
Okay.
You launch forth from home.
Yeah.
You go out from your house looking fine. Or beautiful,
yes.
Loosely translated into that. And so you don't go outside and make up.
No.
You make up inside and you take your beauty outside.
Yeah.
I mean, but then don't we have a need for us to, don't countries need to look at the fact that the Security Council as constituted needs to be restructured? India, for example, has like one of the largest, military personnel in the world, over 5 million. Right, and the part of the G4 backing a call for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. But then these global powers have held on to this. The status quo has remained that way for far too long. And as such, you've seen, like you mentioned earlier on, the back and forth, you veto, I veto, Russia and United States going, toe to toe against each other. And then you've talked about the democratization. What can we say would be a solution to have people have more voices? Because it just feels like you have issues, which some of these issues tend to happen more in Africa, and then everyone just comes in, they try to keep Africa because of, it feels like they're trying to protect the resources. You don't really see the UN peacekeeping going to America to, quell situations because you hardly have them there. The military there is, okay to take care of it.
Yeah, but you see, I think what is important for me is a balance of power arrangement. That there's no one single force in that Security Council, or there's no possibility of a unanimity, most of the cases, whether it's against Africa or against Latin America or for Australia, whatever. But what you find in there is that all the nations of the world, over 200 nations right now in the world, everybody seems to understand that there's a sort of an alignment, which of course really will also reverberate in the Security Council meeting. Take, for example, you just talked about the case of India. Apart from being members of the Commonwealth, India is even finding its own new identity now with its alliance with China and Russia.
And they're members of BRICS.
So by virtue of being members of BRICS, really, to a very large extent, their voice is heard right there at Security Council. You see, what is important for us is how do we bring Africa together as one geopolitical entity that speaks with one voice? That's the first thing. Even in terms of driving the power equation, you can imagine that, for example, there's a resolution in the African Union where Nigeria is the dominant voice, and every other member state of the Union, the other 53 or 56 members are saying to you, oh, you are our big brother, we want you to be represented. But we have not even been able to build an ECOWAS, let alone an African Union. So how do we find relevance? You find relevance by your strengths within your geopolitics. So that is the relevance we should find. For example, we just look at what happened in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. This are our backyard. What was the import of our sanction? Now these boys have come together to form what they call the Sahel Group, even contesting the authority of ECOWAS. So these are for me what is important. Before you go out to go and play on the big field outside, rehearse first. in your small parlor and ensure that you have the right skills to take to the outside. That's my argument. It's not enough to just be grandstanding and moving around the place, wasting resources, and say we want to become member of Security Council, yes, representing Africa as permanent member. And I don't think Egypt is going to vote for you.
Swipe right.
I'm not sure that Morocco will follow you, let alone South Africa. So what we need to do is to first and foremost consolidate at home. And then we are able to speak with one voice. And it is at that point that we can even be inching to a realization of a representation. But as it is, I feel we are contributing, and as a nation, we have played significantly at that body. We have had our opportunities and our timing, and I think that is what we continue to drive. Take, for example, there were a whole lot of hula baloo in terms of Nigeria becoming the Director General of one organ of that body. 2 years counting. What has it added to us in terms of our trade balance?
Well,
Well, it
rhetorical question.
added to Nigeria, but let's look away from Nigeria wanting to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council or even Africa, as we've looked at the chances of African members, African countries being slain because of not enough economic power and even military power.
Yeah.
Yes, to be part of it. But eventually, at some point, from what it looks like, we are the new member. Where do you see it going to? And how do you see that impacting its effectiveness?
But just before you answer, I believe that, you must first tell me or tell us if you think, that restructuring is necessary.
Well, for me, really, I don't think, I even feel that the UN has outlived its usefulness, really.
Has it?
Oh, yes, I feel it has outlived its usefulness. And I don't believe that there's any structural thing that's actually working right in there. You see, because in a global world today, what role are we actually assigning to the United Nations in terms of damning challenges of world peace? Look at the intractable challenge in the Middle East. For how many years? Not resolved. Look at challenge in Congo, Brazzaville. Look at all the trouble spots all across the globe, Afghanistan. What has really been the import of the United Nations in addressing world peace?
Why
That
has
is
the
problem.
United Nations
You see,
been
because-
unable to address issues in this region?
Yes, you see, because the real issue here is the fact that the need for economic justice, shared knowledge, and development is critical and important to world peace. I was sharing yesterday with Hans. I met a young man from Bangladesh who was trying to explain to me the current crisis in their country being fueled by the United States of America. And it was very specific that the rejection of their now SY president of allowing America to put a base at their back was actually responsible for the crisis. Look at the Ukrainian-Russia war. What's here the issue?
NATO.
America made a base at the backyard of Russia. And for you to be able to secure that base, what you need to do is to enter into a compact with Ukraine by making it member of NATO. And Russia said, look, there's an understanding from the old USSR that we are one and we cannot be broken. We are worlds apart, you and NATO. We don't want our member to be part of your member, because our member being part of your member means that you are bringing your base in our backyard. If our memory will not fade us, you know the crisis, the Cuba crisis with America.
Yeah.
And the alignment of Cuba with Russia. And America fought heavily to ensure that Russia do not find a base in Cuba. So what is good for the goose is always good for the gander. That's for me what it is. So what for me is important is that as long as the world finds its balance in terms of peace, that when we come to that table, the 5 members sit down, we never get to unanimity, because if the economic interest of any of the members is touched, what will I think will happen? They will have to veto.
So the play of politics, in essence, is part of the reason why the UN has not been effective in addressing the crisis in those regions.
Yes, of course. Because the interest is there. When America has interest, they veto. When Russia has interest, they veto. Now, China is actually struggling totally, really, to say, why are you using our minority to represent us? And you are calling it China's member of Security Council. Just say it's Taiwan. And that's even why you find that there's a whole struggle of the mainland China trying to even annex Taiwan and make it part of itself. And that struggle is still on. And we don't know where the end is really going to come inside. But by and large, what for me is important is that nations just sit down, they feed their people well, as Denmark is doing, and they are not struggling to be anybody's controller. And the economy is good for their children and their citizens. And I think that's what the world needs, really. But the whole idea is that the United Nations is trying to mitigate against global catastrophe in the name of a third world war. That's all that is all about. There's no economic privilege, really, that comes to anybody.
Now, to that, mitigating against the outbreak of a third world war, do you think it's too late, given the issues in the Middle East, Iran coming to the picture between the crisis, in the crisis between Israel and Hamas? Do you think it's too late?
Well, when you look at the real issue there, also you find that, of course, the Security Council is also polarized.
Yeah.
There's a polarization because the US is pro-Israel and this other part is pro the Middle East or the Palestinians. So you find that the polarization is also there. So there's really nothing, a decision that's why the trouble has actually festered for this long. Because all the resolutions that are taken to resolve that issue, if it's not in favor of an ally, it cannot stand. So what's the use of that body that cannot really live up to its responsibility of making world peace, as it were? That's my point. Yeah, they are playing their own politics at that level, but for us as a nation, what is important is that we have to protect our border. We have to ensure that we are secured. We have to be sure that our citizens are well fed. And then we cannot begin to enjoy the benefits of being prosperous. That's where, when Nigerian passport was a bride of all countries in the world, where we didn't need visa to enter into any country, where we were respected by the superpowers of this world, because we had economic power at that time. You know, it's just simple calculation. Build a strength at home. Once you are strong, people will recognize you. They will even confer leadership on you.
All right,
But we have not done that.
Doctor, we're practically out of time.
But before we go, let's just pick a brains on the current energy situation. So the crisis in the Middle East has led to an upsurge in the price of crude. Are we getting close to another energy crisis? And who are those to benefit? We talked about Nigeria being an oil-producing country who should benefit from this. But does it look like we are ready to reap the gains at this point in time?
Well, of course, we have not put anything on the ground to make us benefit. Those who will benefit will continue to benefit. As long as we have not done things right, it will be difficult to benefit. And I think it was just recently that the president signed an agreement to see how we can lay even a gas pipeline through Morocco to enter to Europe. So to be able to gain from whatever crisis that's going to come up to the world, even if there's no crisis. Now, if they are having energy challenge, because nature has actually favored us, a lot work for us, for our good. But then, of course, we have not invested in this critical infrastructure where, of course, we can say, okay, if we lock up the tap, the whole world will suffer. We have not got into that power. And I think that's the strength that Russia has used over the years. Look at it, the not 1, not 2, not 3 pipe that goes into Europe. And say we will block it, and say if we block it, gas don't flow into your country, then you come and beg us. So people have a bragging right because they have built their economy to an extent with that they can flaunt it all around. And I think that for Africa, there's a whole lot we need to do at home. We need to unite first and foremost to build a one united Africa where Africa trade with itself and build a formidable economy, and then they can now actually be asking for a voice in the global economy. As long as we are fragmented at home, nobody is going to listen to our cry in the international community.
Well, I hope we'll get to not cry for so long. Nobody would want to do that. Really thank you, Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze, for finding time to grace any exchange. And of course, we're looking forward to more discussions with you.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.